Okay, let's try again. So welcome everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our Wednesdays at the J program at the Miami Beach JCC. It's nice to see people here in person, and we have lots of guests watching online as well. I'm echoing. Mauricio, I'm echoing. Oh, it's the laptop. Okay. Can somebody just turn that off then? Debbie, can you take my laptop out? I'm sorry, I'm echoing from the laptop. Yeah, just shut it off. We'll take it off. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we'll start again. But, we're good? Okay. So even without appearances over the last 6 years on A&E, Discovery Channel, Florida Public Broadcasting, Fox FX, the Collectible Show, History Channel, Learning Channel, and Turner South Network, as well as Miami's 6 locally based television stations, it would be safe to still say that our speaker today would still be nationally known as America's foremost authority on the history of transportation to, from, and within Florida, as well as on the history of the Southeast Florida Gold Coast. A resident of Greater Miami for more than 75 years, he is the senior collector of Florida East Coast Railway, Florida Transportation Memorabilia, Miami Memorabilia, and Floridiana in America, and his FEC Railway and Florida Transportation Memorabilia collections are the largest in the world. They are larger than the state museum's collections and larger than the Flagler Museum's collection. The founder and current president of the Miami Memorabilia Collectors Club, as well as the Greater North Miami Historical Society. His collections of Miami memorabilia and Floridiana are the largest in private hands in the country. A graduate of Cornell University's famed School of Hotel Administration, he holds a master's degree from St. Thomas University and Florida International University, both here in Miami. He's an adjunct professor of history at Barry University, where he is historian in residence, as well as adjunct professor of history at the Rhodes Scholar Program. Twice honored by FIU, he was presented with the university's Torch Award, its highest honor, in 2008. He's the only person in the country who bears the official title of company historian, with an American railroad, and his book, Speedway to Sunshine, The Story of the Florida East Coast Railway, is the official history of that famous line. The author of 33 books in South Florida local and Florida transportation history, he is America's single most published Florida history book author. His 5 latest are Broward County in Arcadia's Postcard History Series, the first ever history of that county, the 256-page biography of former Florida Supreme Court Chief Justice Gerald Cogan, the first biography ever written of and about the life of a Florida judge or Supreme Court justice, the biography of World War II hero and Battle of the Bulge German POW Stalag 4B survivor Barney Mayerson, and Images of Modern America, Florida East Coast Railway, which is the first ever full-color history of the FEC, and Lost Restaurants of Miami, a look at Greater Miami's now long gone and mostly wonderful eateries. He's currently working on 4 more books, including a Brighton Beach Memories type history of Miami Beach, as well as Sunshine State Trolleys, the street and electric railways of Florida, along with 2 others. In addition, he has written more than 300 articles, 7 of which have appeared in refereed or juried publications. In much of Florida, he is known as Mr. FEC, and in South Florida as Mr. Miami Memorabilia. But happily, we know him as our friend. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our friend, Mr. Miami Memorabilia himself, Professor Seth H. Bramson.
Oh my God, did you ever hear anything like that? Folks, honest to God, I'll tell you, that was so wonderful, so terrific, it sounded like I wrote it myself, which I did. It was so terrific, if I may add, that I have to tell you, it was so wonderful, honestly, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. And it's just a pleasure, young man, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay well, and as we say in South Florida, thank you for not shooting and have a Miami nice day. Ladies and gentlemen, it's truly a pleasure to be here with you. And before we get started, I would like to introduce you all. And of course, we have a lot of people watching. It's really not possible to introduce everybody, but I would like you to say hello to a few people because joining us today is my bride. November 27th was 45 years, and I chased this woman for 3 years until she caught me. Please say hello to Myrna Bramson. And sitting next to Myrna is the young man who is, and I know many of you have heard him on WLRN 91.3 radio because he is America's single longest running radio show on the same station in the history of the state of Florida. And I know that some of you have enjoyed Night Train with Ted Grossman every Sunday night for 45 years. Please say hello to our friend, Ted Grossman. And two more guests, one of whom actually came in from Colorado, and one who came from Toronto, my brother, Bennett Bramson, and our friend, Julia Andriacci. And she came from Toronto to be with us. So I'm really pleased that so many of you are in the room with us today. And we start off by telling you that many of you may not have been aware, but the first two places, the first two dineries, were actually at the Peacock Inn. And if you come down South Bayshore Drive and then you make that turn, it's Peacock Park. That's where the Peacock Inn was. And then, of course, the Commodore had the wonderful restaurant in their place down in Coconut Grove. Now, there's nothing really that we have from those places in terms of memorabilia. But what we do have, to start with, is the oldest known piece of marked Miami china or glassware from a club, bar, or restaurant. And if you look it up, you will find that W.N. Woods had the first bar in all of Miami. And what Mr. Woods did, he would give his very favorite customers this wonderful little souvenir mug. And it's got his name, W.N. Woods. It, by the way, was at the old 8th Street. You know, in 1921, they changed the numbering of Miami. That's when Miami went to the quadrant system of northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. But before that, 12th Street was Flagler Street. And the numbering started at 1st Street, which was 12 blocks north. Anything north of what was then 8th Street was outside of Julia Tuttle's property. And she did not allow liquor to be sold on her property. And so W.N. Woods had the first bar outside of her property. But best of all, besides the fact that it has his name, on the back, it says, N. Miami, 1899, because anything north of Julia's property was North Miami. And so that's how we got it. Now, in addition, though, we have another wonderful historic piece. How many of you are actually from or grew up on Miami Beach? How many of you? Beach people? Okay. Because, of course, Bennett and I, Ted, he started on Miami Beach, then the family moved to NMB. His dad had the gas station at 5th and Michigan, right? Had the gas station there. Our dad had the sign shop on 5th Street, York Sign Company at 222 5th Street. Keep in mind, and I hear these wonderful stories, people came here in the 60s or the 50s. 1946 was the hottest summer in the history of New York. And I said to my father, you know, Dad, this is murder. Why don't we move to Miami Beach? It'll be hot there, but at least we'll be near the ocean. He said, terrific. Pack up your mother, pack up the car, and we'll go. So I packed up my mother, I packed up the car. I said, Dad, we're ready. He said, fine. He picked me up. He put me in the driver's seat. He said, let's go. There's only one problem. My arms don't reach the steering wheel, and my legs don't reach the pedals. He said, okay, not a problem. I'll drive. And so 2-lane roads all the way, no decent restaurants, no motels. What you had, and some of you may remember, you had these wonderful places that were tourist courts or cabins. Remember that? And they all had signs outside that said, air cooled. You know what that meant? No air conditioning. And so you went in, you opened the windows, or you turned on the fan. And 1946, August, is when we came to Miami. But there was something from the time I was a kid that I loved being here and the stuff. And before we really get started with the next item, I think it's important that we all stop for a moment and we have a beer, especially that we have a Regal beer. And some of us remember Regal beer, all right? Well, you know, we had also a place that some of you are going to remember because it was right on Dade Boulevard and West Avenue. And some of you may remember Mother Kelly's. Anybody remember Mother Kelly's? No? Nobody remember? Oh my God. Well, Dad did the neon signs for Mother Kelly's. And one day he brought us home, and I don't know if this is, I don't know what you call plaster of Paris or made with paper mache, but Mother Kelly was a character, and he always wore the big full-length apron. And ladies and gentlemen, here is Mother Kelly. And Mother Kelly, to a very few people, gave out this wonderful, I say doll, I mean, I don't know what actual term we should use, but it's a figurine of Mother Kelly. But what makes it so terrific is that when you turn it over, there is the coin slot right between the two cheeks of the tush. And you put the coins right in there. And that was what Mother Kelly was all about, a real character. So, you know, there were so many places that we remember that started so long ago. And one of the places that people enjoyed eating at, or several of them, were the golf and country clubs. Now, we know about the restricted clubs. We know that Riviera and Surf and Bath and Lagos were restricted. But you see, certain of the clubs weren't. And among those that weren't, of course, were the beach, not Lagos, but of course the Miami Beach and Miami Shores. Now, people have said to me, but Seth, Miami Shores, no, it wasn't restricted. Let me explain that Miami Shores was the only municipally owned private club in the state of Florida, which meant anybody could, it was what we call a public-private club. Anybody could join. But even if you lived in the shores, you couldn't use the facilities unless you joined. Well, why am I mentioning that? Because one of the great golf clubs, and every one of those clubs had what they call a 19th hole. When you got to the ninth, at the end of the ninth hole, you always had a snack bar, all right? And one of the greatest of them, and we illustrated with this incredible, wonderful plate from none other than the magnificent Miami Biltmore. And on the back, it tells us 19th hole, Miami Biltmore. And people who played golf there just had a wonderful time of stopping at the 19th hole and enjoying themselves. Now, I know that some of you, even if you don't remember Mother Kelly's, are going to remember modern drugs, 41st and Royal Palm. And we often forget that in those days, every one of the drugstores had a lunch counter. And the man who owned Modern Drugs was none other than the late, great Ben Grenold. And some of you may remember the name because Ben became Miami Beach vice mayor. He became chairman of the Tourist Development Authority, chairman of the Visitors Convention Authority, but most importantly, he owned 38 drugstores in Dade County, including what would eventually become Allen's Drugs. He had Jarvis Drugs on 41st Street. He had the Modern on 41st and the Modern on Normandy Isle, plus Sky Lake Drugs. I don't know if you knew that, Ted. Plus all over the county. He had 3 in the black community, one in Brownsville, one in Overtown, one in the other neighborhood of the black community, in which he brought in black pharmacists as managers, but not just as managers. He turned over in writing 10% of the business to them with no investment on their part. This is what kind of a wonderful man Ben was. And every one of those drugstores had a lunch counter. Modern, of course, was the gathering spot for the kids from North Beach Elementary, from Nautilus. The kids from Beach High would come down. And we loved Modern. And oh my God, who didn't remember the cherry Cokes and the chocolate Cokes? And oh Lordy, was that, and the lunch counter. Mrs. Slavin owned the lunch counter at Modern. And I have to share with you that Ben lost an election here on Miami Beach for council by 22 votes. He was so upset that he moved to the cricket club. And it was after that he would come into a place on Biscayne Boulevard. It's now New York's Big Apple Deli, but for many years Dave Cohen owned it, and it was Bagels and Company. And some of you may be familiar with Bagels and Company. And Ben would come in, and I would see him, and I would always greet him, and he would say hello, but he was always taking out. Okay, his daughter Susie was a real glamour girl. She graduated 2 years after me at Beach High. His son Douglas, who sadly and unhappily passed away last year, Douglas graduated in '67 from Beach High. But the point is that one day Ben comes in to Bagels and Company. He sits down at a booth. I walked over to him. I said, "What are you doing?" He looks up. I said, "You're not going to sit by yourself." I said, "You come with me." And I took him over. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, possibly the greatest line in the history of moviedom, from the greatest movie ever made. And I quote from that because this is what it was. Because, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And ladies and gentlemen, it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And Ben and Selma and Myrna and I, we just became the greatest and closest of friends. And we need to put away all these phones and things. Please, let's put everything away. Nothing should be out. Please, folks. My picture? Why would you want my picture? I'm so funny looking, for God's sakes. Anyway, the point is that when Ben passed away, sadly, because this COVID was awful, it was just, anyway, Ben passed away and everything was left to us. I don't mean the furniture and the jewelry, the memorabilia. 22 newspaper-sized scrapbooks. Those are the ones that are 22 by 24 inches. Ladies and gentlemen, not a few hundred, thousands upon thousands of items. You can't imagine, of course, made Myrna very happy. You can't imagine. But the treasures of memorabilia, including menus and items such as that. But in order for us to continue, we really have to move on. And we move on because I know there's only one left. And even though it's not a lost restaurant, it's on its last legs. And you remember this place. And so in order to really get us started, ladies and gentlemen, we really do have to, ready? We really do have to sing the Royal Castle song. Ready? Royal, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Castle, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Royal Castle. We've got the very best. I'm hungry. Let's eat. Let's go to Royal Castle. You remember that jingle now? Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. So, folks, this town, and I say this town, Greater Miami, from Homestead with the barbecue places, north into Aventura, Sunny Isles Beach, North Miami Beach, North Miami. How about Opelika? Say, what was an Old Scandia? Remember Old Scandia, the wonderful, absolutely the first of the great smorgasbords? And then, of course, we had on Biscayne Boulevard, Prince Hamlet. And we remember Prince Hamlet so warmly. Remember, you walk in the upside-down table in the dining room with all completely set, and you'd look up and say, my God, how did he do that? And just one after another of the great and wonderful spots. But we also want to make sure that we recognize and understand that so many of the great dining spots were such as Bonfire on Treasure Island. And Bonfire was owned by my friend, Radio Weiner. Now, you have to remember that we've lived here all our lives, and that I'll get to a little later some of the places that I worked in. You'll remember the names. But you know that Radio owned Embers. And he had, he sold Embers to Duke Sterling. And Sterling was the one who sold it to Walter Kaplan. And Walter's brother, Saul, of course, was partners with Wolfie in the pubs. And I don't know if you knew that Wolfie was a part owner of the pubs. Anyway, if you think about now going from Embers to Bonfire, and remember that the tagline, and this is owned by Radio, who had owned Embers, the tagline at Bonfire was, "From embers, bonfires grow." Okay? I mean, that's putting the stuff together. But we had other great places besides Embers and besides Bonfire. And some of you may remember Park Avenue. On Park Avenue, just north of 21st Street, between 22nd and 23rd? Yeah. Was that what it was? Yeah, right. And just a wonderful place. We had so many of these just terrific, terrific places. Now, there were the fast food type operations, of course, also. And there's just, what is it, Ted? One Dairy Queen left in Dade County or something? Very few. And yeah, and I thought there was one left in North Miami Beach. But anyway, I turned this up. July 15th, 1955, Dairy Queen, 11740 Northeast 2nd Avenue. This is just 2 blocks north of Barry University. My God, I didn't even realize it was there. So you've got this as one of the great places. But you know, when I was asked to come and give the talk here, one of the things that was brought up was we want to be sure we cover the delis, and we're going to cover the delis momentarily. But before we do, I want you to join me, and we'll have another beer from Lums, okay? And I want you to recognize that, remember that Lums, the real Lums, and I call it the real Lums because growing up here, the real Lums were the 6 bars on Miami Beach. That's it. And remember the hot dogs steamed in beer with sherry wine sauerkraut? And the Lumburgers? Oh, Lordy. And then, of course, Cliff Perlman comes in and he buys them, and then he decides he's going to open up a chain of coffee shops, and oh, were they terrible. And just awful. I mean, just ruined. And then, of course, you had Ollie's on 23rd Street, and folks, you know, you get people rave about, and we know the story. John Brown came in and he gave him well, listen, if you had no problem with a guy's sweat dripping into the chopped meat and the cigarette ashes falling into it, then that, okay, fine. But it wasn't fine. The greatest hamburgers ever made were actually made here in Miami Beach on 71st Street, on the south side of the street, just west of Indian Creek Drive. There was a wonderful place called the Normandy Restaurant. And this little Greek guy who was so, he was always mean to his wife. The best ham you would to die for, as the expression goes, all right? If John Brown had walked into that place, he would have given him $2 million. Now, some of you may remember the Athens Fruit Shippers on Collins Avenue, just south of 71st Street. He was the cousin to those fellas, but he was so nasty that they didn't want him in the business. That's why he was at the Normandy Restaurant by himself. But again, we had all these wonderful places, and now, since we've had our beer, I think it'd be a good idea if you join me in a cup of coffee from Pumpernicks. And, you know, the memories of the wonderful delis, but they actually go back further than the ones I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, because remember that we had Mammies and Pappies on Collins Avenue and 20th Street. And there were a number of other great and wonderful places. And if I may be so bold, we've covered most of them in the new book, Lost Restaurants of Miami. Now, here was the only problem. Remember that I've done a lot of books, and when I work with this wonderful publisher, which is Arcadia and the History Press, this book was limited because they have a series. They've also got a Lost Restaurants of Fort Lauderdale, but they limited me to 120 pages for the whole county and 120 photos. And I snuck in an extra photo, so there's 121 photos in there. But the point is that there were just more delis than just what we might remember on Miami Beach. Because what's the one, Marna, I can never think of the name of it, that moved from Miami Beach to Miami? Rosedale. You may remember Rosedale. They actually started on Miami Beach and moved to Northwest Fifth Street, just on the west side of the FEC tracks. And then when they went out of business, I can't remember the fellow's name, it's in the book, about a year later he says, you know, we could have stayed in business and we should have. Another great deli, which unfortunately and unhappily is not remarked upon as well as it should be. And that was Pickled Herring Charlie's. Who remembers Pickled Herring? It was on Northwest 62nd Street, about 37th Avenue, and Charlie's daughter was Joyce, who had her own catering company called Joyce's Catering. Some of you may remember Joyce's Catering. At any rate, it was a wonderful Hamish Jewish-style deli. And of course, if we went south, Marshall Major's. And we don't talk about Bagel Emporium because it's still in business. But we just had, and I now do articles on occasion from, and some of you, I don't know if you get it here on the beach very often, but Biscayne Times. And Biscayne Times, our good friends there, in this issue, asked me to do, and here's the article. We have a couple here for you. There's no charge. I've only got a couple. A look back at our greatest delis. Then, S, Tatala S. All right? So, you know, we throw in a little bit of Yiddish there. Now, keep in mind that we had some of the greatest delis. I mean, people talk about New York, and fine, okay. But ladies and gentlemen, look, you know, everybody wants to defend New York. It's great. So why'd you move down here? You know, same reason we moved down here. But the point is that the delis here were so great. And, you know, we talk about Wolfie's. And we know the whole story because my mother worked for 9 years, our mother worked for 9 years as the night cashier at Rascal House. And it's in the book, or it's in the article. And Wolfie became one of my great mentors in the business, along with the great and wonderful Saul Kaplan, Walter's brother. And Saul was a half owner with Wolfie in the pubs. And when we speak about the pubs, and I have it in, of course, in the book, but the man and his wife who became two of our dearest friends, the great Mario Talucci. Mario, remember Mario first from the Embers and then from the pubs? Mario, ladies and gentlemen, still alive. What is he, about 98, sweetheart? And not doing well, sadly. But I have to tell you this, he is the only living maitre d', hear that term? In the state of Florida, okay? Because you walk into restaurants today, and instead of a warm, cordial greeting, you get, how you guys doing? How you guys doing? What kind of a greeting is that? All right? So Mario, still alive. We talk to Gail once a week or so, but he's unfortunately in very poor shape. but what a handsome guy. Tyrone Power, handsome, all right? And Mario, Saul Kaplan, Wolfie. And one day I said to Wolfie, remember that my experience in the business, I ran some of the finest, most magnificent restaurants in this town or in New York. I ran the famous Lloyd's of the Maison Grande, and then Bernard's in the Carriage House. And then I went over and ran the Piccadilly Hearth on Decorators Row. And then I had the opportunity to go to, yes, to New York. And I went to New York to become general manager of the famous New York Gaslight Club. Playboy came out of Gaslight, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the only 4 Gaslight clubs, New York, 2 in Chicago, and Washington, D.C. So I was brought in to become GM of the New York Gaslight Club. I'm waiting for my interview. I'm on the 2nd floor at the Theodora Bar, and there's a sign over the bar. And the sign says, "Work is the curse of the drinking classes." I like that. But I had to go to the restroom. So I go around, go into the men's restroom. There's this big, huge cast iron bathtub. I never saw anything like this before, with pipes attached to it as the urinal. And it's mounded with ice, I never saw anything like this before. And there's a sign over the bathtub. And the sign says, ready? "These ice cubes are hardly used in our drinks." I said, I got to have this job. And I had that job. And after a couple of years there, Myrna and I had gotten married at the club. And remember, 45 years of marriage, I chased this woman for 3 years until she caught me. And the Gaslight girls, and remember, the Playboy bunnies wore the same outfit, the one-piece bathing suits, as the Gaslight girls, except that the bunny had the bunny, the ears and the tail. And I'll get to that in a moment. But at any rate, the Gaslight girls were all singers, dancers, entertainers, and the finest food in New York City. Remember, elegant private club. Gaslight was the last club or restaurant in New York City in which the maitre d', and the captains were all in tails, tuxes and tails. So you can imagine, all right? At any rate, I came back here, reconnected with my dear friend and partner, the late, great Lloyd Apple, and we did the catering at Epicure for 5 years, all right, with our good friends, the Thal brothers. At that point is when I was offered the opportunity to go to Playboy. And I went to the Playboy Club as general manager. And it was really in sad shape. It was on Biscayne Boulevard at 79th Street. And I was the one who moved in. Mr. Grossman, are you ready? We'll open this up for everybody, please. Because I did what I did in New York with the Gaslight Girls, where we did road shows. No, Ted, it's upside down. Everybody's a wise guy. And so I started taking the Miami Playboy Club bunnies on road shows. Now, remember, they weren't singers, dancers, entertainers, but just as hostesses. And we moved the club over to Lejeune Road, and which we tripled the business, all right? And it really was terrific. And it was from there, though, that I went over to St. Thomas University and started teaching hospitality management there. But at any rate, again, you've got these great and wonderful delis, Pumpernicks, Rascal House, Wolfie's, Junior's. Junior's was a little bit upper level of it, but it was still a deli. And Arthur and Bunny Horwitz were good friends. All these names that you may remember and you may have been aware of. I guess we're going to be getting close to allow for questions shortly. All right, just bear with me. I'm having such a good time. I don't want to stop. Bear with me. So at any rate, we've got these wonderful delis, and we've also got, though, some of the greatest and most wonderful Hamisha places that you can imagine. And I'm going to show you this side first, because you may not recognize it instantly, but I'm going to momentarily turn it over to show you the other side, because our very good friends, the Zuckermans, were the second owners of the Famous. And if you are aware what they did, they made this wonderful piece, and on the back are the Yiddish terms. So the second one down is the Bubi, a pensioned-off babysitter. The Zeta, grandchild's press agent. Ungeblusen. We know Ungeblusen, only it's not what you think. Ungeblusen. Young father who wanted a boy. Tsuris, something you get from children. Nachas, something you get only from grandchildren. So it goes on from there. It's just a wonderful piece from the learners and from Harry Zuckerman, and it's the kind of thing that we have collected for these many, many years. And I have to tell you that the stuff keeps turning up. I just turned up this menu. Ladies and gentlemen, I turned this up about a week ago. Barney's Restaurant, 1670 Alton Road, which would put it on the west side of Alton, in the block between Lincoln and 17th. Never heard of it. I never heard of Barney's Restaurant. And yet, the stuff keeps turning up. Now, keep in mind that we at the Bramson Archive have been collecting all of this stuff. This past May started our 63rd year of collecting. Some years ago, through an interesting series of events, I made the largest purchase of Florida historic memorabilia ever made by a private individual in the state's history. And it was at that time that I was able to make the purchase of the collection of William Gleason, no relation to Jackie. And if you Google William Gleason, Florida Lieutenant Governor, you'll find out that he was one of the most important names in the history of Florida. And tremendous landowner, but he moved here. And he moved over and basically founded a place which he called Biscayne. Biscayne is today's Miami Shores. We have the only two pieces with the name Biscayne on them. I will be speaking January 6th at the Miami Shores Library on the history of Miami Shores for the village's 90th anniversary. So if any of you are able to join us, would like to join us, would love to have you. I'm going to be going to have those enlarged so that we may display them. But the Gleason collection was just incredible because Gleason and his brother and his nephew and William Hunt bought land all over Florida. You can't imagine. And one of the great features in our L'chaim, and let me explain to you that the book L'chaim, The History of the Jewish Community of Greater Miami, and as our wonderful host knows, I am the only person in the state of Florida who gives the talk which is titled The History of Discrimination in Greater Miami. It's half Jim Crow and segregation and half restricted clientele. And ladies and gentlemen, I debunk the myths. Oh, I remember the signs that said no Jews, no dog. No, you don't. There were no signs that said no Jews, no dogs. There were about 6 hotels that did have signs that said no Jews. If they had a sign that said no dogs, it was maybe 50 feet away. And brochures and the booklets, it was all couched terminology. Gentile clientele, restricted clientele, a clientele that's your sort. And how about the King Cole Hotel, a Fisher Hotel on 47th and Meridian, where Miami Heart Institute went in, right? And their wonderful routine was, Old King Cole was a discriminating old soul. So it was always couched phraseology. Why do I mention the Gleason brothers, though? Because when I bought the collection, you can't begin to imagine. Not thousands of documents, ladies and gentlemen, tens of thousands. And because we are here, and yes, we're going to conclude momentarily, but I did want to share this with you because on our page 55, a letter from Uncle William Gleason, to his nephew George, about selling land on Miami Beach, March 7th, 1924. I have your letter of the 5th in regard to selling the Miami Beach land in regard to the $300,000 offer for it in bulk. I looked into it and found that the offer was $250,000, and it goes on from there. And the second paragraph is one sentence, and it says, "I do not think we should sell to Jews under any consideration." And so we, the Jewish people, have had this marvelous and incredible history on building Miami Beach. And it has been not just the history of what the Jewish people have done, but the history of what we've done with the food. You have to understand how incredible our restaurants and delis, and remember, we've had the places such as, what's the one on that for years that Daddy used to take us to on Collins Avenue between 74th and 75th, the deli? No. Uptown. What did you say? Uptown, thank you. Uptown Deli. And we had the walk Hal's on Normandy Isle. And we had the delis all over town that were not sit-down delis. Just wonderful places to get the food to take out. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great pleasure. I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I have presenting, and certainly we will be delighted to answer any questions regarding the history of the hospitality, food, and beverage business here in Greater Miami. So again, all, thank you.
Seth.
Yes,
Seth,
sir.
thank you so
Yes, sir.
much. This was such a pleasure. If anybody does have a question, I ask that you come up here to this mic because we want the viewers from home to be able to hear as well. Does anyone have a question? Or actually, I can bring the mic to you. Why don't we do that?
I have an idea. Why don't you bring the mic to them?
Well, you know what? That's a great idea.
Am I glad I thought of it?
I don't know.
Everybody loves a wise guy.
But, I do want, while you're thinking of your questions, I do have a question to start you off on because I think everybody wants a little gossip. Is there any story from one of the delis in particular? I mean, you're a collector of stories that resonates with you when you heard it that you would want to share with us.
There's so many. I think the most important one, though, is the people who have met in the delis, who have either met in places such as Uptown, where you walked in and you said you want the cream cheese and the Nova and the this and you took it out. And the same with people going into the various delis, Junior's, Wolfie's, Rascal House, Pumpernicks, Mammy's, Pappy's. How can you even begin to tell these wonderful deals that were made, business deals, people who met for the first time, friendships. Look at me with Ben Grinauld. That's one of the greatest of all. I knew who Ben was, and yet it was meeting him in Bagels and Company, seeing him so many times, and then telling him he couldn't sit there because he had to come and sit. He couldn't sit by himself. What a story that is. There's just, it could go on for hours, and if we had hours, I would tell you some, but we don't. So if it's okay, boss, we're going to move on to the questions. Thank you.
Just curious, were any of the delis kosher, and what was the story of the kosher supervision in terms of the restaurants?
Wonderful. Remember, you had places such as Royal Hungarian, right? And you had the Star. And our dear father was Dad was in the sign business, and I'm getting to the answer. Dad was in the sign business, and he was the contractor for Herman Pearl and Pat Deere at Kosher Zion, who had their place down with Irving Karp was Carnival Fruit. down on Biscayne Street. And Seymour Friend with, whatchamacallit, fish. I can't remember the name of his seafood. Sanitary, thank you, the Sanitary. And Dad did all their sign work all over the state for Herman Pearl and Pat Deere. But in addition to that, you had a number of, remember, the famous wasn't kosher, it was kosher style. But you had the Star, and you had Dad's, and the reason I brought up Dad was because his very dear friend was none other than Boris Pritchard, who had Isaac Gellis on Washington Avenue, and Isaac Gellis was kosher. And so there were a good few that were the kosher, not kosher style, long before the influx of the Orthodox kosher. And so you had all these different places going back even then. In fact, Ted, did you mention something in North Miami or North Miami Beach that was kosher? Well, Harfiness wasn't kosher. Harfiness was a great place. Oh, and then, of course, we should have mentioned the cafeterias. The Governor, the Ambassador, which we loved, at Hoffman's and the Holiday. And they weren't kosher, but they were just Hamish and just wonderful. Thank you for asking. I hope I answered the question for you. Good, thank you. Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a little nicer here. With the Playboy Club was on 78 in Biscayne.
7701.
And they did not allow women to have membership. But my father had a membership, and then they had a ladies' pink card. And we would go there for lunch, and they had this man slicing the prime rib. Was wonderful. Another story. My family was in the drapery business, and my father did all the draperies for the Playboy Club. It was jewel tones, red, green, blue, and he had to hire a factory just to store those beautiful drapes. And he did the drapes, and then when they sold to the Hilton loved the drapes so much that they left the Playboy drapes up.
All right, well, now you got to remember that the hotel was here on the beach.
Yes.
The club was at 77th to Biscayne, and then I moved it over to the airport. So that's when we moved. But it was the same company, but different entity and operations. But that's very interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. Good. We have another question? Sir?
There were two restaurants that I used
You can pull your mask down.
to go to. One gave me dyspepsia. One gave me nachas. The first,
Oh, I love it when they talk dirty.
the first was a chain called Pickin' Chicken, where they never changed the oil to fry the chickens. And the second was the Nasharai in the Saxony Hotel.
God bless you, brother. First of all, wait. Yeah, we'll get back to you. 1 second. First of all, Joe Hart, who owned Pickin' Chicken, would, of course, take over and a series of motels, and he would take over a series of, by the way, I set this question up, and here's your mug from the Castaways, okay? And that was owned by Joe Hart, who had built the Pickin' Chicken group. Now, I say group because, remember, Pickin' Chicken had stores at Lincoln and Collins, 22nd and Collins, 71st and Collins, and the one nobody remembers except me, and it's in the Miami Shores book, the Boulevard of Dreams book, 90th and Collins, where the Publix is today. There was a Pickin' Chicken there. And then, of course, what was the other one you mentioned? The Noshery at the Saxony. And remember, you had some great hotel coffee shops, the Buttery at the Allison, Chez Bon Bon at the Fontainebleau. And remember that I worked at the Fontainebleau for 4 years. When I left, I was assistant director of entertainment, program coordinator, and head counselor. Why did I leave? I left to go to Cornell. That's why I left. But what a wonderful series of coffee shops we had in Miami Beach. Of course, the Noshery everybody loved because of the great ice cream delectables. Just wonderful memories that come flooding back. And thank you for bringing those up. Absolutely terrific. And this lady had something else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you for a fabulous presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
And I admire your good memory. You the delis leave Miami Beach? They were so successful.
What a great question. And you've asked the question. I don't want anybody offended. Okay? Folks, you know, time goes on. None of us, except me and Myrna, stay young. Kidding, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. You have to understand something, that what occurs is that as a Wolfie ages, and I'm giving you one example, and he reached a point, he just couldn't do it anymore. It's a murderous business, all right? And the reason is because, after all, let's cut the costs. So my good, close personal friends, what's their names, come in from California, from Jerry's Deli. They buy Epicure. Now, wait, let me tell you this. They actually improved Epicure. It's hard to believe. Yes, I know, because remember, Lloyd and I did the catering there for 5 years. They take over Rascal House, and they literally ruin it. Rascal House had the greatest chocolate marble cake on earth. And they take, and instead of using butter, they substitute lard or some margarine or something. It's dreck. On top of that, oh, sorry, no curse words. Sorry. On top of that, though, they bring in this guy as the, quote, manager, and he's walking around with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. They take off the buckets of pickles and coleslaw and everything. They're thinking they're going to save money. They're not going to save money. They're going to ruin the business. And what happened was, you know, you walk into a place today. We go to, Ted and Myrna and I sometimes go on 163rd Street to the, what's the deli? Not deli. What is it? No, that's 125th Street. The restaurant. What is it? No. The restaurant, not the deli. The restaurant. On 163rd, east of Biscayne, Outback. So we go into Outback. The old days, the greeting was always, good afternoon, good evening, folks. How are you? Welcome. Nice to see you. And you walk into these places today and, how you guys doing? How you guys doing? And I stop at each one of them, seriously. And we'll be with Dr. Harvey Glasser and Janet, or we'll be with Dr. Eugene Eisman and Mrs. Dr. Eisman, and with Myrna, or with Bennett and Julie. And I'll say, wait a minute, do these beautiful women look like guys? And, you know, they're startled. I said, how about good evening, folks? How are you? Welcome. And they're so stunned, they don't know what to say. That's part of the problem. And then you walk into Olima on the in Bay Harbor, or you walk into Five Guys up in North Miami. The music is so GD loud, you can't hear yourself think, much less talk. And I said, can you lower the music? We walk into Olima with Ted. There's one other couple. I said, sir, can you turn the music down? What's wrong with the music? Nothing. I said, sir, it's much too. He said, they're not complaining. I said, look, we'd like it. He said, well, that's the way it is. We walked out. That's the difference. And the difference is because everything has changed. And the mine host attitude, you remember that term, folks, right? The feeling, after all, how do you think that I took Playboy and rebuilt it? How do you think I took Miami Shores Country Club when the great General Les Forney, who was village manager, brought me in, from 515 members to 1,618 in a year and a half? We had them pouring in from Surf Bath, Lagorce, Riviera, and from Westview, pouring in because Lloyd's food was so great, and we were so warm and gracious. Everybody felt at home. Of course they had to join. And then when General Forney left, he got a much bigger job in the private sector, and they bring in this hillbilly, this yokel, this cracker, this racist, anti-Semitic, am I allowed to say goy? S-O-B, this piece of low-life trash, Eli Johnson. And this guy comes in and just, you can't, that's how it happens. Because they lose interest and they lose strength, and you can't keep it up. They think they're saving money. They're not. They're killing the place. That's it? Or one more? One more question.
There's somebody that didn't get a chance to ask.
Was there anybody else we missed? No. When we first moved moved to Miami Beach in 1956. My second meal was at Pickin' Chicken. Thought it was wonderful. I come from Providence, Rhode Island. On the table, there was a jar, and I assumed it was vinegar for the French fries. And, of course, that's what we have in New England. So I went and put in the French fries, but it was honey for the chicken. And to this day, I love chicken with honey.
Well, honey, I love that chicken story. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to wish you all a wonderful and happy and safe holiday and all the best. And as we say in South Florida, deck them halls with matzo balls. Take care. All the best. Thank you again.
Seth, I want to thank you so much. I don't know about you, but I am really hungry right now. Really hungry. But, you know, Rascal House is closed, Wolfie's is closed, Pumpernicks is closed. I don't know. Is there any good deli like in Miami Beach left? Or in Miami left?
Well, there are some good. Let me see. I think I got to turn. There are some. I think. Are we okay? Yes. Yes. There are some not quite as Hamish as they were, but you've got Bagel Bar East on 123rd Street. In fact, in the article, I mention what's his name at what is now Big Apple New York Deli. He's doing a pretty good job. Bagel Bar East. And of course, up on Biscayne at 192nd, Bagel Cove. We enjoy that very much. So yeah, there are, and of course, Bagel Emporium down across from UM on South Dixie. So you still got some. They're not at the level of Hamisha that we remember, but they're still pretty good. Right. Well, they're close enough. Flakowitz.
Okay.
Close enough for government work. Yes, ma'am. Oh, well, that must be brand new. How long is it open? Okay. All right.
All right, well, we'll check it out. You heard it, folks. Seth, thank you so much once more. I really, really appreciate it. We learned a lot. Thank you, everybody that's online and from the Miami Beach JCC. We hope to be doing a lot more of these things in person, so stay tuned. Thank you, everyone.